Mike Bohn here now with Chael Sonnen, a man who needs no introduction. You all know who this man is, one of the best analysts in the game. Chael, I am fresh off a plane from Saudi Arabia. Hell of a weekend. I know you've had a lot of thoughts. I guess first, before you get to that, just how are you doing, man?
I'm doing great, thank you, buddy, and welcome back. I know you got to be exhausted. I respect that you're getting into it. Man, can I jump right into this because I got to tell you, Mike. First off, I was surprised to hear from you, very pleasantly so. But I don't think that we're sitting here talking about this match. Had this match gone the way that we thought it was going to be, I mean, yeah, I do my little YouTube or my little podcast, but I hadn't planned on talking about this today. And if I did address it, I was going to say he got stomped as he should. No harm, no foul. Come back to the sport that you do was MMA. I never thought that we would be here discussing it, particularly into this context. The pay-per-view numbers aren't out just by example, but I suspect that it was a complete bomb. I don't believe that people wanted to see it ahead of time, and it turned into be incredible. I don't think either one of us expected that.
Okay, so yeah, what do you feel was so incredible about it? Because it was one thing, I was there, I was in the room, every celebrity, every boxer. I mean, it blew my mind, seeing all the people there. But when Kanye West walked in down the red carpet, I was like, okay, like now this is getting outrageous on top of, seeing Eminem and just all these other luminaries there. But I'm in the room. It felt like great energy there with all those people. But watching from home, what did you just kind of make of the spectacle of the broadcast of everything that kind of consisted of that pay-per-view?
Oh, that was fantastic. Are you like from a production value? That was fantastic. I'm talking about a big fight like leading into it. Take your usual suspects, whether that's Sports Center, Jim Rome, Dan Le Batard. None of them touched this with a 10-foot pole. I'm a fight fan. I work for ESPN who broadcast this on paper. I didn't know until Kevin Iole texted me the day of that the fight was going to go down at 2 o'clock. So, I mean, I just thought it was a 7 o'clock event. I'm talking about that's how poorly that this got off the ground. I'm not trying to give it a hard time. Giving it a hard time is extremely relevant. Please let me explain. Francis might have had the greatest sporting and competitive night of his career. Many people believe that your greatest performance will come in defeat. That's debatable, but I felt like that's what it was for Francis. Look, if you try to tell this story in history, in the future, and you don't give the expectation leading into it, the whole story misses its mark, right? Because this is going to be written down. This is going to be in the back of magazines. It's going to be in a book somewhere. It's going to be in a .com that you do a Google search for. And it's going to show up on one line. It's going to say that Fury beat Francis. And everyone's going to go, well, of course. Who's Francis? I'm a boxing fan. I've never heard of this guy, right? It's one of those things. And you move on with your life. That isn't fair to what happened. This was an incredible event, and the expectation going into it is the entire story. Look, when you talk about those dignitaries that were there, that's not like a fight night that's going to be in at T-Mobile in Las Vegas somewhere, right, where they pay and get themselves there. These guys coming in on somebody else's tit for a party or whatever, it has nothing to do with the fight. They didn't mention it. They didn't talk about it. Kanye didn't tweet about it. Nobody was discussing this match. But here we are today, and we're in awe of what we saw. So when I put down the production, or rather the promotional value going to this fight, I don't say it to knock the fight. I say it to complement what ended up happening.
I think that's fair. I definitely saw some little aspects of Fight Week, the face-offs. They did good numbers for us, but outside of that, the stories, some of the interviews, they weren't doing that great. But once it arrived, I think that's because people thought it was going to be, what we all thought. It was going to be an easy night for Tyson Fury, and maybe it would be a short fight. When you were watching, at what point did you know this was going to be different than when we expected? Was it the knockdown, or did you get a sense earlier than that this isn't going to be the narrative that everyone laid out for it?
When you talk about this, some of the numbers did good leading into it. Okay, fine. I must admit mine did too. But, Mike, I watched the co-main event begrudgingly. I wanted to watch it if I knew when they were going to walk. I watched the co-main event. The foggiest idea either guy's name who was in it. I don't say that to be a jerk. This was 2 days ago. I got a great memory, and I don't even know. And I just saw it. I mean, okay, this thing was a bomb. When you want to talk about learning that this was going to be a fight, Francis Ngannou, again, the expectation, the story going in, this is all about a moral victory, right? He outsmarted the UFC and he got a few bucks. And if you can't do math, you'll think that financially he did better than he would have done if he just did his fights in MMA, which is simply not true, but it's the way the story is being told. I'll play along. When you understand from that perspective, every second that Francis can make it is a win. If he goes into a minute, it's a win. If he can get through a round, it's a win. We all know this is based around a moral victory and absolutely nothing else. So When Francis comes out and he's not looking to kill time, he's not looking to clinch him up, he's not looking to stay away from him. They ring the bell, and Fury was the first one. Whoa, Fury's the one that let me know this was not what we expected. Fury's the one that pulled back, goes, whoa, and starts moving because Francis came across the ring. Then throughout the night, Fury is as good with feints as anybody that I've ever seen. He's the best at feints of any heavyweight that has ever existed. Francis didn't fall for him. Every time Fury would flinch, Francis just stood there, or Francis would throw back, but he never covered. He never backed away. He never blocked like Fury thought he was going to do. And you've got to understand, so much of this is muscle memory. You're a guy like Fury from an X's and O standpoint, right? The physicality of it. When you start this at 5 and 6 years old, when you can throw 1, 2, 3, 2 on a heavy bag or on a focus mitt with your dad in the living room, before you can say the alphabet, which is quite literally what he did, you're still dealing with muscle memory. So when Tyson Fury flinches, whether it's on mitt works out, whether it's when he's warming up and you see him with his dad, whether it's on the heavy bag, whether it's his sparring, whether it's in his fights, he feints. Then the guy gives a reaction. The guy does something. The guy does something based on what the guy does as a reaction. Then Fury throws his combinations. He could never get started. Every time he flinched at Francis, Francis just stood there. He didn't fall for it. I don't know if he didn't fall for it because he hasn't done enough of this that he didn't know he was supposed to react, or if he just genuinely didn't care. I mean, I truly don't know. Like, what I was witnessing is not what I expected. And when you get a guy to flinch, when you get a guy to react, now you have the guy boxing. When the guy is forced to box, who is not a lifelong boxer, he just can't make it. He just simply won't hold up, which is the number one thing that boxing is about. Francis didn't fall for any of that. His condition, his mouth was closed. They're going to the 4th round. His mouth is closed. When he puts him down in the 3rd round, that's when you realize, oh my God, there's something happening here. But when he put him down in the 3rd round and then came over him and did the dance, I mean, I just will tell you as a fellow competitor, I could not have done that. I would have been so exhausted and so conserving of energy, I would have never done the shimmy and the shake. No more than when Cody Garbrandt was doing it to Dominic Cruz. I mean, I'm just sharing for you. It takes a special level of confidence and conditioning to burn energy mocking a guy. It was a special night all around. I probably knew right off the bat this is not what we were expecting, but when he put the big man down, nobody had to question from then on.
And as far as the result, I mean,
you can't get an analysis, by the way. You can't get what I'm giving you right there. There is nobody anywhere on any of the that's going to tell you that the flinch and the feint, based on the muscle memory and the neurology of Tyson Fury, is what threw off Tyson Fury. They're all going to talk, oh, it's the power, or Fury had a bad night. They're going to have all. They're never going to give you that because you don't have anybody you could have called as good at this as me.
That is a fact. And it seems like from what Francis is saying, it just seemed like he was so much more present in the moment. Like he recalls that Tyson said at the face-off right before the fight, I'm going to take you to school. And he said when he stood over him, who's the teacher now? Like this is all stuff that seemed, he was just very present in that moment. He fought the way a boxer should fight, not what all the analysts said. He needs to go in and brawl. He needs to, throw caution to the wind from the first bell and try to take him out of there. He went to points and probably should have won. I mean, what do you think? Do you think he got robbed of a victory? Were you unsurprised being like, hey, boxing was not going to let Tyson Fury lose this unless he's knocked out cold? At the end result, were you frustrated? Were you upset? Or were you, did it end how you expected?
I mean, you've got to understand, robbed is a tough word. This was an extremely close fight. It was probably a draw. If you look at the entire fight, like as you're watching, you go, this is pretty close. That's not how it's scored, though. People do this in MMA all the time, too, and go, he got his ass kicked. It doesn't matter if he got his ass kicked. If the math doesn't work, it's a 10-9 must system. I answer you that way as a way of not answering your question. When they were in the 10th round, I didn't know they were in the 10th round. Like, they didn't put it on the screen. Generally, they do. Okay, 8th round, 9th round, 10th. They didn't do that. So we're all viewers looking around going, hey, does anybody know what round it is? It looked like a draw in terms of the competitiveness, but then you have the knockdown. Now, moreover, before we get into a robbery, is the consistent fact. You had 3 licensed judges. They didn't agree with each other. So this isn't a matter of the public trying to push back. I felt they should have raised Francis's hand, but was it a robbery? No. I mean, I've seen so many bad things in the sport of boxing. What Nevada was getting ready to do to Conor, they don't have him winning a single round the night he beat Floyd. He was beating Floyd going into the round that he got stopped. That is robbery. But when you have 3 licensed judges, they don't agree with each other. Nobody had the same score. So now us, the audience, doesn't have to come in and poke a finger at them. They've done it to each other. But no, there was no scenario where Francis was going to win a decision. And moreover, I'd like to make this point for you, Kay. Do you know what a conspiracy is? And I don't say that to condescend. I don't think that you do. I think you've heard the word and maybe you've even used the word. I don't think you've ever looked up what the word means. Conspiracy is where you have a conversation and the conversation you're having is about something illegal. You might not even know it's illegal, but that is what conspiracy is. That's why everybody that you ever see charged with a federal crime, they have conspiracy. It's very easy to commit. Now, I bring that to you. People think there's corruption within boxing. There's no conspiracy, meaning the promoter doesn't come in and sit the judges down and have a conversation. Hey, it needs to go this way. They go one step further. They do what a gangster would do. If you live that life, the boss talks to you. He doesn't have to say things. You hear what he didn't say and you get the message. And I bring that to you because you've got a promoter that knows we've got a financial bomb on our hands, but somebody else is writing the check. So what the hell? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to use this as a commercial, and that's all this was ever meant to be. Fury versus Ngannou by the promoter was meant to be nothing more than a commercial for Usyk versus Fury. So you bring Usyk in, you sit him in the front row, you tell everybody that's willing to listen, as soon as this fight's done, which is going to be a highlight reel for Fury, we're going to bring Usyk in, put him with Fury, and set up an actual payday and an actual sport that's competitive for actual titles that we contest. There was no judge there that doesn't have the sense God gave geese to know which way this was supposed to go. So yes, in that regard, there was no way Francis was going to get a fair shake.
Yeah, you're not wrong there. I mean, I was obviously there on the ground, talking to the PR people, asking what's going to happen after the fight as far as post-fight. They said we have 3 versions of the press release that's going to come out, depending on how Tyson Fury wins. Are they going to face off in the ring? Are they going to do a press conference together after? Is just Tyson going to talk? They were obviously preparing purely for that. And we didn't get an official announcement, a press release after the fight. Tyson Fury canceled his post-fight press conference. We didn't get to speak to anyone after the fact. So clearly none of this unfolded as the way they thought it was going to.
Sure. And that's a little bit of the problem. I mean, that was Francis's ring. That was Francis's night. And Fury didn't go as far as to say, hey, this is wrong and you should have the championship. But he got as close as you could come while trying to stay with the sport and promote something. I mean, he had to switch from this fight to this decision to this interview to marketing. He had to do that as best you could. And he did stay very respectful. He took a lot of the excuses out of the mouths of the boxing people that like to make excuses. I mean, they're still having to do it today for a Conor McGregor with no experience beating up Floyd Mayweather. I mean, I heard one as recently as, well, there was a size difference. I watched those 2 weigh in the day before, and I'm talking about Conor and Floyd. I watched them weigh in the day before with a 4-pound size difference. If you're the kind of wimp that thinks that that's a difference, go ahead. Well, there was a rehydration. Go ahead. Whatever you think Conor weighed, he did not have the, even in your mythical mind, he did not have the same weight advantage that Fury had over Ngannou. It's just one of these things. So then Fury takes all of the excuses away from him. He says, I did a 12-week training camp. It's the hardest fight I've had in 10 years, and that's the most I've ever trained for a fight. It was one of these situations where I appreciated that from Fury. But when it goes to Ngannou, he stayed a gentleman. Francis appears to have some real class and be a nice guy. I wish that he never used profanity because he does speak eloquently and politely. He should not use profanity. It's very bad that he does that because it goes against the soft-spokenness. But even KSI 2 weeks ago had the sense to call for a rematch in the ring. Francis not only doesn't call for a rematch, he allows Usyk's fat ass to get in there and cut a promo. Usyk wasn't there to fight. He wasn't there to throw punches. He was there for one reason. He came to a different country for one reason. It was to speak words. Then it turns out Usyk can't speak words in a way that anybody can understand. He comes into Francis's ring and disrespects Francis. He says through the interpreter that it wasn't a great fight and Francis didn't do great. And it looked like Fury was coasting and being nice to him the entire time. Francis is standing there. He doesn't call for a rematch. I mean, it was a really big mistake. It was a huge mistake. And now they're saying that the promoter of Usyk versus Tyson, which is already signed, that the promoter's kicking the can. He's going to do the fight, but he's going to do it another time, which is supposed to come with a remedy known as Tyson getting stripped. We'll see how that all works. More than anything, it opens the door for Francis to reinsert himself, say, hey, we got to do this again. And I have a feeling Fury would say, we sure do.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see how that goes. But I want, before we kind of move on to a little bit the future stuff, I know you had been on your YouTube, you tweeted out some things very critical about how this impacts the perception of boxing. Can you elaborate a little bit more on those thoughts? Like, do you feel like this was, Francis didn't get the win on the scorecards, but it seems like he maybe got a win over the world of boxing, especially seeing how some of these crossover fights have gone historically.
Well, this is devastating for me. For boxing's my number 2 sport. In the year 2000, my father and I had a very serious talk. Was I going to pursue wrestling and try to make the Olympic team, or was I going to try to make it in boxing? So when I tell you I love it and I've competed and I do boxing, I've always believed in the sweet science. I believed it was real. I believed the muscle memory and the training, the conditioning, and the smarts and the wits and the IQ. I thought those things were real. This is the second time I've seen the greatest ever get beat up by a guy who's never done it. And when you tell people that, they say, well, come on, Francis is boxed and McGregor's boxed, and that's a part of MMA. But there's other parts of MMA that wouldn't translate. Like, neither one of those guys is going to go enter Abu Dhabi and get the jump on Gordon or Craig or Nicky Rod or Cyborg. It's just not going to happen. Neither one of those guys is going to go represent whatever meager country they're from and make an Olympic team and make it out of the country, right? It's not going to happen. It turns out we don't have very good athletes that go into boxing. So if you bring a guy that's a really good athlete, that you could see making it in the NFL, just put some pads on. You could see him maybe on the courts in the NBA, throwing sports out. But the point is, I'm talking about athletes. It turns out boxing doesn't have those. There is no categorical check mark you could put in a meaningful box to favor Ngannou over Fury. Not with size, not with length, not with reach, not with experience, nothing except athleticism. Francis is far more likely to throw on some shoulder pads and suit up in an NFL pro game with no practice than Fury is, or than Klitschko was, or than Ruiz's fat ass, or than Anthony Joshua. I mean, right? It's one of these weird situations where it's very disappointing. It's hard to see. You want to go back to 1993? We thought we were going to have every kung fu and every karate and every taekwondo and every aikido gym all come out to watch the mixing of martial arts. It was the opposite. All of those sports found out on day one when they set that octagon up in Mobile, Alabama, that their sports are fake. So their instructors told, don't go and don't support this. Our techniques are too dangerous, which is why we won't use them in a competition like this. It was a scam. It's been a scam forever. But I didn't think I was going to have to go through it. I thought I'm the one that's got this figure. I got the wrestling and I got the boxing. My life's work wasn't a waste. And now I find out that boxing is a sham. You don't have to be a second generation guy. You don't have to stay in a school. You don't have to put gold caps in your teeth. You don't have to do any of that. You can still just go in and beat these guys up. Apparently the sweet science ain't all that hard to figure out.
Very interesting. So coming out of this, people are asking, how big of a star is Francis Ngannou? How did this change his value? I just did another podcast where I was being interviewed a couple hours ago, and someone asked me that very question: where is he ranked? And I feel like maybe he's not the number one, in terms of like a pound for pound, side by side sense, but he feels like maybe the most reliable. You're going to hear the names like Jon Jones, who of course, injury, outside issues prone. Conor McGregor, we don't know how it's possible to even get him in a cage. Francis doesn't seem like the type of guy who is going to say something that denigrates combat sports, do something that might denigrate combat sports, and obviously has an amazing backstory and so much that kind of goes into what makes him who he is. So what would you think about that? Where do you think he ranks in terms of maybe the most valuable combat sports commodities right now coming out of this performance?
Well, this is a guy coming off of an injury who did not honor a contract that he had. I mean, if not for nothing, I'm all for praising the heap on him too. He showed some massive skill, some heart, and some character. But no, what you just said, that's just factually not true. You said he's not injury prone. He just came off an injury. You said he's a reliable guy. He had a written contract that he didn't honor. He sat and ran the damn thing out. I think it's been almost 2 years or just short of since he's been in there last. I want to praise Francis today, but I do want the story told correctly. I think that he beat Fury. I think that he exceeded expectations. I think that he deserves a lot of credit. But I've already seen the story mistold, that he played this one and didn't fumble the bag. Well, if the bag is a bag full of money, yes, he did. He absolutely, to make believe that $10 million is somehow significantly more than he would have got on his pay-per-view participation alone against Jon Jones is incorrect. Not to mention the 2 years that he sat equals 6 fights. Let's bring it back and call it 5. It's like making it really easy. Let's call it 4 fights. His 4 fights would have equaled more than 10 million had he promoted them. I mean, you got to really understand this. It's not the way that people keep saying that it is. I don't know what he's got in MMA. I don't know who is out there for him. I know the 2 leading candidates to be his next MMA opponent are between Junior Dos Santos and Fabiano Verdum. I don't give those guys a hard time. They're studs. Nobody's clamoring to see that fight. Meanwhile, if I told you that Francis is going to return to boxing, he's going to take on Deontay Wilder, you will stop what you're doing and you will mark that on your calendar. So let's see where he goes. I do want to praise him, but I praise him in the spirit of, let's tell the story accurately in the way that it happened. And what you just said isn't true.
I think that's fair talking about the past. I guess I meant right here today, moving forward in terms of what can come in the future. But I do think that's fair. And what you said there kind of relates me into something that I want to ask you about, comments that you had made, I believe, to our producer here, Ryan Garcia, back in April, when this was all up in the air. We didn't know what was going to happen. You said Francis, was a deer in the headlights. He needs to wake up and call Dana White. Given how this is all unfolded, do you stand by that? Have your thoughts changed at all about kind of how this ultimately played out for him?
Well, again, I believe if you have a contract, you should honor those contracts. I believe that. And I don't believe that somebody should be praised for not doing that. Now, in fairness, the contract does allow, if you want to sit and you want to wait, that's going to be your punishment. You can get on with it. And I want to give Francis his due from a but this is from a financial standpoint, right? From a business standpoint, he doesn't know what we're doing. If he understood what we were doing, he would have called for the rematch. From a competitive standpoint, if he just wanted to go and compete and test his skills, of course, I love those guys. Of course, I respect those guys. So I would most definitely give him praise. I will tell you as a fan, he and Jon Jones had an opportunity to face each other. The moment that was no longer, from a legality standpoint, possible, they both spoke up. All of a sudden, they both found their balls when they had different contracts and they couldn't meet. Some of those things can be a little bit aggravating to me. But as far as him being able to box and having the composure, as far as walking out there when the world didn't believe in him and maintaining and holding up, I mean, listen, to do 10 rounds, Mike, to explain to you how difficult that is to do, one of the best boxers ever, Floyd got all the credit. But at the same time Floyd was fighting, there was another guy. And the other guy has never lost. And the other guy won the Olympics, which is something Floyd didn't do. There is a massive comparison that Floyd has not been the best boxer of his generation. The guy I'm speaking of is named Andre Ward. Andre ended up in some kind of a dispute, though, and he ended up cutting his career short. But Andre Ward, from 14-year-olds, the time he started boxing at 14 to today, has never lost. I don't know if you know that. Very few people know. He never even lost as an amateur. He was a world amateur champion. He was an Olympic gold medalist. After he won the Olympic gold medal in 2004, in 2005, he debuted in the pros right here in Portland, Oregon. I was working with the commission. I was assigned to his locker room and watched him. I was the guy that signed the tape off on his hands. This is the Olympic champion who was also an amateur world champion who had never lost, and he was scheduled for a 4-round fight. His next fight was a 4-round fight before he went to 6. This is the progression. Mm-hmm. They will keep you at 3-round fights. I mean, the entire amateur career, they walked Francis into a 30-minute environment. That is insanely difficult to do. And he held up, and he believed in himself, and he believed in his coaches who haven't done this before. Not for nothing, he's training out of Extreme Couture. That's an MMA gym. He's got Nixick and Cooper with him. Those are total studs from the world of MMA. I mean, he literally walked out there just believing in himself. I give him full credit. For the rest of the things you said, I mean, come on, let's tell the story the way it happened, man. He left a lot of money on the table. To make believe that he couldn't have gone out there. I know what I got paid to fight Jon Jones, when he would be able to get fight in that kind of a fight if he was able to promote it. And see, that became the big difference. He wasn't happy with his money against Surreal Gone. Well, neither was the company, wasn't happy with him. It was the single greatest storyline in the history of the heavyweight division. That's still true to this day. The single greatest story in the history of heavyweight MMA was Surreal versus Francis. Former training partners, both champion, interim, undisputed. It was Hogan versus Warrior. They did 336,000 pay-per-view buys. It was a bomb because he didn't know how to promote. Now, this was a different situation where somebody was willing to take the ass kicking and write the check. It depends how you want to look at it. He should have honored his contract. He would have made more money staying busy if he stayed in MMA. That's true. He probably gained more respect and surprised all of us the way he did it. So from a competitive standpoint, he did a great job. From a business standpoint, people say he fumbled the bag. Those people are a little better at math than his team is.
Fair. I think those are good points. The interesting thing, though, is with how it all played out, right, with Jon, and I guess we could talk about that a little bit. I know you were talking to one of my good friends, Oscar Willis, and he brought up a point to you during your guys' interview, which to be fair, he reiterated for me, actually, that I had brought up after we heard news that Jon Jones got injured, being like, wow, what if Francis had stuck around and then Jon suffered this injury in the lead up to their fight? Of course, you don't know what's going to happen. Maybe it would have happened at a different time. Maybe he would have been training differently. You don't know if the same injury would have occurred at the same time. But if he had stuck with the UFC and that fight was off the table for even another year, that would have, I wonder how that would have impacted his psyche about the decision he would have made to re-sign there.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if you have a crystal ball, but I would still just push back. We're just assuming all these things. I would still push back. Jon just got hurt. These two were supposed to fight in the last calendar year. These guys were supposed to fight in November or December of 2022. So I don't know how accurate any of that is. Not to mention you got a couple of more. Not to mention that then there was a true trilogy fight where you split the first two versus Stipe. I think that those are really good nights of business. But I don't know if Francis would have done his part. I don't know if he would have gone out and sold it and promote. I don't know. I mean, he and Jon did nothing until that fight was impossible. Then both of them, I gotta give Jon the same knock. Jon never found his balls until the fight couldn't happen either.
True. And so I guess last thing on Francis before we move on to a couple other things I wanted to ask you. If you're him, you're his team, what do you do now? I mean, it seems like he's saying a lot of different stuff. There has been slight mentions of the rematch. I know he did an interview with Ariel Helwani today. He certainly wasn't banging the drum like crazy, like you had said, but of course there's interest for it. But he'd mentioned Deontay Wilder is training MMA, and that could be a possibility. Of course, there's that in boxing. From what I keep hearing, and his team had been telling me on the ground all week, the next fight does have to be for PFL on this March pay-per-view. And who knows who the opponent will be. There's nothing, you mentioned those names. Those don't seem wildly attractive. If you're him, do you do everything you can to stay in the boxing world and get one of these other marquee fights? Or do you think MMA needs to be the next move, which to me seems like a huge risk, because if he loses to MMA in an MMA fight, it feels like all this steam he gained from this goes away and the big boxing fights lose a lot of their appeal.
Sure. I don't disagree with any of that. I mean, they don't have to be mutually exclusive. He can go to the PFL. He can operate with the PFL. And Deontay Wilder happens to be a free agent. He's not tied up with Hearn or Arum or WBA, WBC, IBF, or any other initials they want to make up. So the PFL can go and promote that fight. I mean, they work with the same commission. The only thing that they would have to do is follow the commission rules, which is a 17-by-17 ring, instead of doing the cage. So those things are possible. I don't think that it's likely. I think more likely, though, is if somebody was to come in, I think Deontay Wilder's the right avenue. I think if I was to juxtapose Junior Dos Santos or Verdum versus Francis against Wilder versus Francis, I don't think you have a very close comparison. So, but the PFL could also loan him out, right? He could work with the PFL. And you could find somebody to come in and give X amount of money as a way of getting his athlete. Like those contracts call for all those types of things. But I mean, it's a tough spot. It's not as though Francis made $10 million. You got to understand that. And maybe he did. When the pay-per-view comes in, maybe he did. I have a feeling that pay-per-view did not do very well. Getting honest answers on pay-per-view numbers is colossally difficult in the first place. I don't think it did very well. So I think that he was given $10 million as opposed to he made $10 million. And I think if you've still got somebody that wants to give him $10 million and possibly buy him out from a PFL on a loan off, I think that all those conversations are possible. It's just incumbent on Francis to create those conversations, not you and I. People are going to hear what I just said and go, my God, Chael's right. I don't want to see him fight Junior or Verdum. I don't want to see him fight Junior and Verdum. I want to see him go over and box Deontay. But I can't do that. I can add fire once he creates the conversation. And it's always been something he doesn't understand.
Yeah, and one of the things that he tweeted out earlier today, he said, I would go settle the trilogy with Stipe while Jon Jones recovers, and we can do that fight after. And all the responses, well, why did you sign with PFL then if you're wanting to do that? And the naysayer will say, well, if they want it that bad, the UFC could co-promote, but we know how the UFC operates, and that seems like a very unlikely thing. So for him to even be mentioning Stipe and Jon at this point, I don't really see the service in it.
Well, there's a tremendous disrespect to his wage earners, the PFL. Just so you understand this psychology, and all fighters go through it, that fame is a drug, and a post-fight depression is extremely real. I can assure you Tyson Fury is depressed today. And my point for saying that, it's not just the loser goes through it. The winner goes through it too. You've got all this attention. You've got all this excitement. You've got all this hustle. You're in the fancy suite. You got a car waiting for you downstairs. Your phone's going off. Everybody's calling you. Everybody loves you. Everybody's behind you. Your name's in headlines. And all of a sudden it stops. It's a very hard thing. And when fighters need part of that narcissistic supply, when they need that drug, they will go on social media and they will say something, no matter how silly, goddamn, if those strangers will just, if they'll just give them some kind of a ding or a buzz or something to look at or a DM. I feel that that's what's happening. It's one of the hardest things to do, but it's one of the most important things from a marketing standpoint. Take your oars out of the water. When everyone's talking about you, let them talk. And it comes back to Francis not understanding. For him to go out and talk about Stipe when nobody else is talking about Stipe, people aren't dying down. I'm trying right now with you, one of the most respected reporters in the business, to get him a rematch with Fury. I'm trying to get a conversation going from guys that are willing to write checks and lose money on a guy that doesn't know how to promote to get him a big old paycheck against Wilder. He's meanwhile talking about Stipe, who's under contract exclusively with the company he just left. I mean, some of these things, it's hard to do. Put the goddamn phone down. Do nothing. Be a big, mysterious monster. Have people want you. Nobody has to want him. We can get him. We can get him right now in 160 characters or less. It's a mistake.
I don't disagree. Two other topics I wanted to touch on. Of course, Jon Jones came up. That completely overhauled the UFC's 30th anniversary show. Next week, UFC 295. We now have an interim title fight between Sergey Pavlovich and Tom Aspinall. Supposedly, Stipe Miocic wasn't asked to be part of this fight, despite him saying he would have at minimum liked the phone call, liked to get the phone call. Didn't say he would actually take the fight if it was offered, but would have liked that call. Dana White said it would have been a disrespect to do it. Your thoughts? Did this entire situation play out? Best case, should they have stripped Jon? Was the interim title the right play? Is waiting to do Stipe and Jon and have this interim title winner just sit there waiting for the winner of that fight, not knowing if both guys will retire and they'll even fight them? Was this all played the right way?
Well, your problem comes tomorrow. Your problem doesn't come today. But if you're going to Madison Square Garden, you got an event, it's not sold out. You got a few problems with your headlining act. Now that's not your headline. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like Stipe and Jones wasn't some great night of business, and now you've got less than that. You got to put the belt up. If you promised fans it's close to you got to put the belt up in some regard. When I tell you the problem comes tomorrow, there's never been a time in this sport, and I fully understand, Mike, that we are fiercely going to adhere to whatever rules we make up on the spot in this space. But we've never had a healthy and willing interim champion. It's just never happened. And then you have the return of the undisputed champion, and they don't fight each other. They always fight each other. At a minimum, if you're looking at precedents in history, we can all agree the interim belt makes you the number one contender. What we're talking about now is having a healthy and willing interim champion who sits in the front row and watches somebody else fight for the undisputed belt. Well, what happens then? If we stick to the script that we're going with, which is that's a retirement fight, which I'm here to let you know it's not. But if we stick to the script, it's a retirement fight. So now this guy in the front row isn't getting ready to come to the ring and do a face-off to have the undisputed belt. He instantly, as soon as the words "I'm retired" come out of this guy's mouth, this guy is now the undisputed champion. Like, that's weird. That's going to be problematic for me. I've seen enough things that will accept it and let it go. I mean, Colby Covington was the interim champion, never lost, and one day wasn't the interim champion. Colby Covington beat the BMF champion and has never become the BMF champion. Like, there are riddles in this sport that would throw off even Alex Trebek on Jeopardy, but I'm just sharing for you, that can't happen. We can't have an interim champion who's happy and healthy and two other guys who both at that point, right, one of them will be removed from the sport 4 years when that fight goes off. The other one will be removed from the sport 3 years. One of them is the heavyweight champion who's never punched and or been punched by a heavyweight, and the other one got carried out on his back on a stretcher. Like, this is a tough sell to have a happy, healthy, hungry, youthful interim champion in your front row watching that go down.
Yeah, and it just feels like a very risky situation too, right? And I agree, maybe it is a tomorrow problem, but you think ahead, what if they wait 8 months to do this fight and Stipe gets hurt or something leading up to when they rebook it? There's a lot of things. He'll be 41 years old by that time. Who knows how his body is holding up at all these things? Maybe he loses interest over the next year or something. It just seems like a lot of holding out hope that this plays out very well. And when you're talking about Jon Jones being involved, that seems like a very risky play as a promoter, but maybe they don't have a better option.
Yes. No, you've got to hold this fight. You got to have a belt up, right? It's MSG. You got to find your interim champion. You then come out with something along the lines, oh, we just talked to a doctor. It's worse than we thought. We're actually going to go ahead and elevate this belt to the undisputed belt. But when Jon comes back, it'll be his choice. We'll let him have Stipe, or we'll let him fight the interim champion. We'll see what he wants to do. I mean, it has to be that. We just can't have an interim champion and undisputed champion both willing and ready and not have them fight. It's a tough stuff. Man, I'm good at storytelling. I can't tell that story.
Agreed. Well, one last story I wanted to ask you about. When we were over there in Saudi Arabia, all the stars were out. Conor McGregor comes down the red carpet and speaks to a couple of us reporters. Doesn't do a ton of media in the sense anymore. And I asked him, where kind of things stand. And he seemed very fired up at minimum. He seemed to have his head in the game. He was dropping Alexander Volkanovski's name, saying that he relates to kind of the mental struggles that he revealed and not being able to fight and make his living, which is, I think, the first time I've ever heard him speak about Alexander Volkanovski in a way that wasn't negative or crapping on him, like on Twitter and stuff like that. So to me, it felt like a more raw Conor, a more honest Conor. Did you see his comments? And I guess what were your takeaways from what Conor said in regards to his comeback, which seems to be legitimately in the works now that he is in USADA. It's out there. He's been tested 3 times already. And as long as he makes it through the 6 months, it seems like we are going to get him in the octagon in April.
Yeah, I mean, I was interested in it, to a degree. I'm interested in it. I remember where I was when Conor McGregor versus Chandler got announced. Right now, that seems like the right fight. But at the time, that was very unexpected. Gaethje was in the sweepstakes, and Tony Ferguson was always poking his head up. And Kamaru Usman had even said, I'll give him a title shot up here at 170 if he wants to come. Like, everything was on the table for Conor McGregor. But the same day that this got found out, and I was driving a rental car with my partner, Ryan Parsons, we're going to the Forum to watch Fedor's retirement fight against Bader, to put a time perspective on you. The same day that this announcement got made, that's going to be Conor versus Chandler, and they're going to go and do the Ultimate Fighter, they asked Conor at what weight class. He said one answer. They asked Chandler what weight class. He said a different answer. They asked Dana, and they got a third answer. The reporter didn't ask them all at the same time. He called this one directly. Then they didn't know they were all getting asked. And I remember seeing that and going, wait a minute. Never in history have we had a fight where we don't have a weight class. That simply does not happen. There's venues. There's a lot of things. We don't have a weight class, and we still don't have a weight class. It still has not been stated if Conor's going to go to 170 or 155, they're going to do a catch weight. They went on Twitter and said they were going to go 185. I'm just sharing with you, like, this is getting a little bit weird at this point. To see Michael Chandler training every day, which he is, to see Conor McGregor anywhere in the world except for a gym, which he's never at, it's one of those things. Like, there is a money grab at some point. You will ask every fighter, why are you still fighting? At some point in his career, why are you still fighting? And the answer, if he tells the truth, is because they're still paying me. It feels as though Conor is getting into the cash grab. If he's over there in Abu Dhabi, he's at the table, he's with Manny Pacquiao, he's trying to make a boxing match. Like, I can't blame him for doing these things, but there was a time in his career where he's hungry, youthful, active, and busy, and could go do both of those things. That time is many years ago, and it just seems as though at some point we're getting trolled. So let's see what happens. He's back in the pool. That's a good sign. He's fighting Chandler, they say, at a weight class they haven't picked. No bout agreement that's ever been signed that way.
Yeah, it does feel like one of those things where you're not going to believe it until you actually see him step foot in the octagon, and there's still a lot of a runway between now and when that can realistically happen.
Is that a statement or a question? Like, I feel like you're trying to get out. I feel like you've actually been trying to get out with me for a while keeping me overwhelmingly long. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts here. By the way, do you admit you can't get an analysis like this anywhere? You cannot get a breakdown from the business side to the competitive while being accurate and giving accurate quotes like I did. That was shocking by me. I was actually on vacation. I didn't even know the fight was happening. I thought it was at 7 o'clock. I didn't plan to watch it. I did watch it while on vacation, and I still crushed it. That is amazing. I'd like to compliment you on having me on as a guest. With that, kaboom.